Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first of its kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast. Hello, and welcome to the PBSE podcast. Steve Moore and Mark Castleman here, coming at you with episode 229. From a partner. Questions to be answered. Answers to be given today. We're excited. It's going to be good. There's a lot to talk about today. It's not a new topic, but it is one that does need to be talked about periodically because we know that the issues surrounding the question that was submitted and the submission that came in are hard, and they are difficult to process. And sometimes we have to go back and kind of re-accept some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So we appreciate this partner being so vulnerable and sending this in. We have done a few other podcasts on this topic before, just so you all know. So feel free to search that in the blog function on pbsepodcast.com. if you'd like to see that, but we will give kind of a fresh take on something that we have answered before and expand on it a little bit. That's going to be the goal for today. So I'm going to go ahead and just read this submission that we got recently, and we'll just jump right in. Okay, here we go. And again, this is from a partner. Do I just have to accept he, meaning my addict partner, can never be faithful? That an addict will always be an addict, so he will always have to fight the want of others. There will always be temptation, but recovery means being able to face it and not let it overpower. So in other words, what she's saying, because that's kind of a confusing sentence, that there's going to be temptation, but because of that, basically, does recovery mean that this is just, going to be something that just happens forever and I can't ever really be over this? I don't want that. I don't want urges and triggers just fought off by him. I want them gone. If they will always exist, the addiction will always exist. That says to me, he will always have a want for others, a want for more. It says he can never be truly faithful, that I cannot be his only desire. I cannot be enough for him. So in staying, I just have to accept that.
Wow.
That's about it. Like I said, we've addressed this topic before, but that's probably the most straight up, straightforward, just here it is. This is why I'm frustrated from a partner we've gotten in quite a while.
Yeah, it was very, very concise, very heartfelt, and we, as we read this, Steve, you and I, just our hearts, there's so many times where we get messages from partners and our hearts just melt.
Oh yeah.
We can so feel and hear and see where she's coming from on this, because we always, what do we always ask? We see these words she sent in on the surface, but what's under them? What's under these heartfelt expressions, this pain? What is this partner asking for at the deepest level? That's immediately where we went. We could read so much into what she's really asking for in the, you know, the depth of her soul. And there is a
Mhm.
lot. There
Yeah.
is a lot that she's asking, and this is how she's expressing it. And we had our first bullet here. She's asking for what she was promised in the very beginning.
Yes.
Right as I started courting and dating my back then my girlfriend, my fiance, things were said, promises were made, impressions were given, assumptions were made. And we talk with so many partners, and we hear so many messages come in where they say, I just want what I was promised in the beginning.
Yeah.
Is this ever going to be exclusive? Now that I finally know he's an addict that struggles with this, which I didn't know for the first 5, 10, 20, 40 years of our marriage, is this the rest of our lives now? I just have to accept it. I'll never have what I thought I had in the beginning. I hear that in these words.
Absolutely. Well, and it's a difficult topic to tackle, admittedly,
It
because
is.
and we will just tell you right out the gate that there are some podcasts, not just on this topic, like I mentioned before, but on some others that we cannot fully flesh out today that you'll have to maybe use for reference. So, for example, we've done a couple of podcasts on the difference between lust versus attraction. And you
Yes.
will need to really reference that to fully understand some of what we're talking about today. So let us just give that caveat because we simply cannot address all that in detail today. But we'll be talking, but there is absolutely some of this has to do with semantics. Some of this has to do with an understanding of what recovery really looks like. And some of it also has to do with an understanding of how, again, lust versus attraction versus recovery all work and interplay with each other, and what a healthy, realistic outlook is, not just in for a marriage in recovery, but for many of us, and this is why I think so many spouses struggle, the only marriage or the only relationship we're in is the only one we've ever been in. It's our only reference point, right? Understanding even if betrayal had never occurred, how do lust versus attraction play into a day to day, just a regular average
Yeah,
marriage,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Because the other,
So,
we talked about what were kind of the other things we heard deeply beneath her words, right? To be desired, to be pursued, to be exclusive, to be chosen, to know who my partner is, right? To know who is my partner that I am choosing. Do I have full honesty and transparency with this person? I want to be safe. I don't want to have to endlessly be hyper vigilant, on guard, watching to see what he's watching, keeping track of him. Right? We felt all of this in the submission that she made. Is this the way it's always going to be? Right? And one that hit me hard in my relationship from my wife. I do not want to be in competition for the rest of our relationship for his attention, his affection, his desires, his loyalty, his faithfulness. I don't want to compete for all of those things. But all you people talk about porn and sex addiction, and you seem to be insinuating that this will always be possibilities for him not to give me any of
mhm.
these things I just expressed, or not to give them to me persistently and consistently. And it's always going to be wondering. There's always going to be a little part of doubt. There's always going to be the waiting for the shoe to drop. And this is what we felt in the words that she sent us. Is this our lives?
Yeah. Well, and so let's just kind of go to the meat of the question, right? Does a partner simply have to accept then that he will always be one step away from betraying her again, right? Because that's really what we're hearing,
Yeah,
right?
isn't that what it all means?
Is he always just going to be, like on the edge of this cliff, that may just perpetuate all the way back down to where we were before?
Yeah.
Am I going to be walking on that razor's edge? And
Mhm.
in order to really answer that, and again, this is where we would say there's more specifics in some of those podcast episodes I just referenced. So again, you can find those at by searching under the blog at pbscpodcast.com by finding more detail about this. But if we talk about quote unquote temptation and living in the real world and what that looks like in terms of normalcy, right? If
Because
in
she
just a
because
oh,
she
go ahead,
asked
Mark.
specifically, she said, there will always be temptation, but recovery means being able to face it and not let it overpower.
Mm,
She said, I don't want there to be any temptation. I don't want there to be any issues.
sure.
I want us to be done with this.
Yeah,
And you can legitimately feel where she's coming from on that.
for sure. Well, and so we probably ought to address the temptation piece first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what we're going to kind of shave off one piece of temptation. All right. Because there's the desire to act out. And then there is the actual attraction component that drives the sexual mechanism in a person. Okay. And you have to separate those two if you're going to talk about this temptation concept. All right. So if we talk about attraction, for example, so we'll break that off and talk about that first. Attraction is a good way to put it is almost like it's a force of nature, right? It operates not just in the sexual realm, but it just operates in general in relationships and between people.
Well,
People,
and we
go ahead.
always run into the word attraction being very problematic for a lot of people who listen. And Steve and I kind of use the word a little different. I, when I hear you say attraction, Steve, having worked with you all these years, I hear you in your definition of attraction, meaning noticing regular people in everyday life, right? Feeling a leaning towards,
Yes, I was going to say you
example,
need to include the leaning towards part.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel a leaning towards the opposite sex as part of my makeup. It's
Well, but
just
again, that it goes way beyond just the sexual, right? Or if because that's why I use the bigger terminology, because as I go throughout my day on any given day, right? I feel attracted or unattracted to people in all sorts of ways. I will watch or I will listen to a podcast episode about something, and depending on if I agree with what the person's saying or not, or how they said it, I may feel less of an affinity towards that podcast next time I watch it, right? As I interact with clients, I have clients that I work with during the day where in another lifetime, we just really jive. Like I could hang out with this guy. I could go, do a hangout time with this guy. I could go spend time with this guy. We could be like best buds in another world. And I have other clients who I work with fine, but I would never, that's not something I would ever choose to do. Does that make sense? Attraction is so much bigger than just this sexual piece, right? We are inherently pulled towards or pushed away from others in all sorts of ways. And
right.
that's why I say that it's just this general force that operates out there, right? People resonate or connect more so, whether it's emotionally, sexually, intellectually, with other people, more so or less so. There's more of, I'll use your terminology, Mark. There's more of that leaning to, right? And so attraction is simply that something that just happens in the environment. It just is. It's not something that we control. It's not something that we manage. It's not something that, or I shouldn't say manage in terms of like we regulate it. It comes inherently from who we are. The sexual aspect of that, we call it what? Our arousal template. We talk about that all the time on here. The others we don't have formal names for, right? But we just have this affinity towards different attributes of people for different reasons. Now, what we do with those feelings, those leanings, I like that term, I'm going to use it. Leanings, right? What we do with those leanings, now we've crossed the line into the world of we now leave the bus of attraction slash leaning, and now we are looking at lust. Because lust, which is where addiction operates or where sexual acting out operates, has everything to do with not initial impulses or leanings or attraction or whatever vernacular we're using. It has everything to do with action,
It's
right?
acting on it. It's
What am I
acting on it.
doing with this or not,
Mhm.
right?
You
How am
have
I
a
operating with it? How do I engage with it, etc.?
Yeah, you notice someone, you have a thought occur to you, you feel a certain leaning towards somebody or whatever, and it just comes and it goes, and you continue on with life and what you're doing. Or do you stop and do you entertain it, act on it, give it space, go forward with it, right?
Yeah.
That's the world of lust.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And that's the realm of addiction.
So that's how we would address that first part, right? Now there's a second piece to this temptation piece, right? Which is the actual acting out compulsion itself, right? It's the addiction, it's the biological, emotional linkage that's happened in the brain over time, right? In chemical ways and in emotional ways that links certain behaviors, certain triggers, certain factors in the environment towards acting out, whether it's to cope, to numb out, to celebrate, to whatever the case may be,
Yep.
right?
And I develop my brain literally becomes rewired so that it develops those patterns, those habits, those behaviors, those responses to life. And that now becomes the way I'm wired.
Correct.
Addiction literally changes the brain. Now, the question I had years ago as I first got into neuroscience and into recovery, I asked my mentors who were neuropsychologists and scientists, okay, I get the rewiring part, but guys or gals, can an addiction brain be truly rewired back to healthy states? Right? What does that mean? How long does it take? And for the brevity of this podcast, I can tell you without any hesitation whatsoever, after 20 plus years of being immersed in the neuroscience of addiction and recovery, the answer to that is absolutely emphatically yes. Just as the brain was rewired for addiction, it can be rewired again for healthy, right? Healthy life, healthy relationships. I do not have to be a slave to these temptations, tendencies, urges, compulsions for the rest of my life. I don't. You can literally rewire and change.
Now, that is absolutely true. However, we need to be transparent
And
here. And
there is a caveat to that,
there is,
which I was
yes.
about to say. So I'm going to let Steve say
Oh, okay.
it.
So what we know about neuroscience today is that as the brain continues to form, and that process never stops, by the way, as it continues to make neural connections between, again, different variables in the environment, certain emotions, certain experiences, certain feelings, certain whatevers, right? And it's constantly forming these new neural networks and maps and whatever you want to call them. Once those networks are formed, in other words, once those links are made between, for example, triggers, right, to act out and certain behaviors, the research, being honest, shows that those links, once formed, they do not ever fully go away.
They don't.
Okay. That's the reality.
Don't. But and I want to I don't know if everyone listening has heard of something called a Hoberman sphere. A Hoberman sphere is this little toy for kids. It looks like a little ball with all these little intricate little connections. And you take the little plastic ball that's about the size of a, depending on the one you get, could be the size of a maybe a grapefruit. And you take it and you expand it out, and this big lattice work of plastic turns into this huge ball that's like the size of a giant beach ball. You're like, how did it go from the size of a grapefruit to a beach ball? And I've used that Hoberman sphere to show guys how to understand the wiring that's happened when they develop addiction. And so it starts out as this little tiny lattice work when I first get into addiction, right? I start out curious. I start entertaining, for example, pornography a little bit. And then I get into using it as a pleasure outlet. And then I finally get to where it becomes my coping mechanism. And I've gone from this wiring in the brain that's the size of a grapefruit, and I've expanded that wiring to the size of a giant beach ball. Now
Yeah.
that addiction wiring is so huge and so deeply etched, it's dominant. It dominates my life because the wiring is immense. However, if I get into recovery and I start making new choices, if I start recognizing triggers and taking a different response to those triggers in life, and I stop accessing the big giant addiction wiring, what happens to that wiring as I start accessing it less? The brain has a rule, it's called use it or lose it. Think of the brain as a muscle. If I stop exercising that addiction wiring, what will it do? It will shrink and atrophy. And the brain says, oh, he's not using that wiring anymore. Let's shrink it down and shut it down, shrink it down to the size of a little grapefruit and stick it over there on that shelf because he's building new wiring. So we're going to expand that new wiring over there and make it huge. So it's what is the dominant force. That is absolutely reality, everyone listening. The brain is neuroplastic. It shrinks and grows according to where I put my attention, where I'm putting my where I'm using my tools, where I'm spending my time. However, guys will say, so Mark, once that addiction circuitry shrinks down, does it just go away and disappear? I say, well, no, guys, unfortunately, that little grapefruit is always over there on that shelf, waiting for the time. If you decide to go back to all of that, it's only too happy to expand back in size to the big giant beach ball.
But see, you can
The
see the common theme here, right? The common theme here is this concept of choice and what do I choose? What do I access?
It's all based on choice, all of it.
Right. And furthermore, that compulsion, that compelling decreases, right? It's not just the slipstreaming of the acting out itself or the linkages themselves. We become, and Mark and I speak from experience as two addicts in recovery with this, the desire to act out diminishes greatly.
Very
I've
much
been doing
so.
recovery far too long to know that I could never not be tempted again. That would be a fallacy and a lie. But I also, the times where I experience like a genuine trigger to act out, I don't think I could remember. I don't think I could tell you the last time that happened. It's been a long time. But it always is a possibility, right? Now, how do we continue to stave that off? We continue by feeding healthy connection. We continue to feed healthy patterns. We continue on the recovery journey. Now, this kind of takes us full circle to where we need to go in terms of discussing a little bit and comparing a recovery minded marriage, right, versus a marriage that maybe had never been exposed to this sort of betrayal or
Yeah.
this
So
sort
let's
of trauma.
say you have a marriage where these addictions never entered in, and the guy wasn't keeping it secret, and he never had the issues. Versus
Right.
a
So,
marriage where this has all happened, right? All of this addiction and betrayal and so forth.
yeah. So most couples operate in a place of, I don't have a better term for it that I've been able to come up with over the years other than operate from a place of healthy naivety,
Healthy naivete.
which basically means, right, when we first go into a marriage, nobody sits down on their wedding day and thinks about all the ways in which they could be potentially their marriage could be ruined by infidelity or acting out or addiction or any number of other conditions, right? We go into a marriage typically full of hope and a bright outlook and things are going to be great. I mean, my wife and I, crap, we thought everybody that had come before us in marriage were idiots. We dated for like off and on for like 3 years. We knew our crap. We're like, we got this down. These other idiots that like get divorced and stuff. What is wrong with people?
Yeah,
People
what
are
is wrong with them?
morons, right? So we go into a marriage with now the reality is at any point, even like the day of a marriage, at any point, a guy or a girl, the man or the woman, can elect to make a poor choice that sends them down a road of addiction, a road of infidelity, a road of whatever. Believe us, we run 2 therapy clinics and have for over 40 years combined. We see it all the time, right? Those things can and do happen, but most coupleships do not operate under that naivety bubble being popped, having gone through what couples in recovery have gone through.
Now,
Couples in recovery have experienced firsthand that those things absolutely can and do happen, right?
I'll tell you what a lot of partners I've worked with, how they would respond to what you just said. Well, I understand what you're saying, Steve, that hypothetically, we both have the possibility somewhere in the universe that that could go wrong, but that's never been the case for me as the loyal, faithful partner, and it will never be the case. Steve, that possibility doesn't exist for me. I
Mm.
will never betray my spouse, and you can't say that I will. So you can be hypothetical all you want. He betrayed and I did not. I never will, but now the possibility of him doing it again will always exist.
And I would absolutely connect and empathize with that statement. Mark's put me on the spot now. This was not in the notes, but we're going to do it. Um, that absolutely, and I can definitely empathize with an increased awareness of the reality of that. And I guess you could make the argument. Well, here's a good comparison. I am a cancer survivor. I'm a two-time cancer survivor. Statistically, I have been cancer-free for over 25 years. Okay. Statistically speaking, with the type of cancer that I had, by most standards of measure, the likelihood of a recurrence of cancer of the kind that I had past the 5 to 7 year mark drops to well below 1%. And people are considered for all intensive purposes to be cured. Okay. That does not change the fact that I still, even though it might be incremental, I have an increased likelihood, not just because of the cancer, but because of the radiation treatments and things that I got, of developing cancer again. And it is slightly increased above that of the average Joe out there. Is it more? Yes. Is it measurably more? No. Right? For all intents and purposes, I am considered cured, cancer free. I'm not under any restrictions and haven't been for 2.5 decades. Okay. Because if you look at the statistics, the bell curve goes way down and you've got that line, right? That's like ever approaching zero, but never hitting zero. Right. That's probably the best comparison I can think of with this sort of a situation. Can a guy is a guy who's never been who has been engaged with addiction in the past, does he have an increased significant risk of relapse? Yeah, absolutely. And especially fairly early in recovery, just like with my cancer analogy, the recidivism rate is quite high, just being straight with you. But the longer a guy maintains a recovery, the more quality recovery he obtains, the more sobriety he gets under his belt. And ladies, this is not clinical theory. Mark and I have lived this. Okay. This is
Yep.
not like we're reading this out of Patrick Carnes' book. This is our life story. I'm 10 years sober now. Okay. So we're speaking to this from a real place. Over time, that desire to act out becomes so minuscule that it's almost negligible. Again, it's been months and months since I had any sort of direct trigger to act out in some way. Do I still have a couple of brain cells tucked back in the back somewhere that represent that neural connection? Mark's grapefruit Hoberman sphere, if you will, right? That could always light up again and go down that road for sure. And that's why I continue to take care of myself and do good recovery work. But here's the point we're trying to make. The recovery work that I do now, let me just think and make sure, outside of attending a 12-step meeting, which you could make the argument everyone should be attending one of some form or another anyway, outside of a 12-step meeting, the stuff that I do to take care of myself are the things that healthy, high functioning, non addict, never been addicted to anything adults do. Journaling, making and keeping good connections, making sure that I have regular accountability with somebody that I trust. I have people in my corner that I can go to help point out my blind spots in areas where I may not be operating the best, right? All of those things that I do now are things that a quote unquote normie can and ought to be doing,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
and this
go
comes
ahead.
up with a lot of guys in recovery who I'll have guys ask
It
me,
does.
Mark, how long do I have to keep doing this? It's kind of the opposite side of the fence from the partner who wrote
Yeah.
in, who said, how long do I have to worry that he could go back to his old behaviors? And the guy will say, how long do I have to keep doing this recovery thing? And I'll pause and then I'll ask a couple of questions of that guy. I'll say, well, rehearse for me, if you will, the things that you're doing on a daily basis to be a healthy guy in your recovery. And they'll go down the list with me, right? I'm journaling. I have a support system of other guys that are also trying to be their best selves. I check in each day with my wife and try to be emotionally transparent and vulnerable with her, right? They go down this whole list. And when they're done, I pause again for a minute and then I ask them, so tell me which of those things you just rehearsed for me, which of those do you consider things that you would want to give up that are not part of a healthy life and healthy relationships? And they'll go, uh, well, I guess nothing on that list.
Mm,
And then it occurs, usually the light bulb goes off. Bing. Oh, this is not about me being trapped in this recovery prison for the rest of life and someday becoming a normal boy, thinking of Pinocchio. It's that I finally learned how to live in a healthy way. I finally learned how to be in a healthy relationship. Why would I ever want to stop doing those things?
yes.
Then they go, oh, this is a lifelong living healthily. Yep, there it is. So stop calling it recovery if you've been at it a long time and just call it healthy living. Call it
Yes.
connected, intimate relationships.
Yeah.
Living that way says, yes, does the possibility that I could relapse, that I could get back into trouble, will that possibility always exist? Yes, at some small, minuscule level, it will. And some ask, well, why do they always say that in recovery, Mark and Steve? Why do they always tell addicts that you need to stay humble and realize that you can only stay sober today? Why do you guys always stress that so much?
Because you can't.
I can only guarantee I can be sober today. The reason we do that, and Steve and I live by that every day, even after many, many years of sobriety, we still say, I can only tell you that I'll be sober today. Now, you would say, well, doesn't that freak your wives out knowing that you could go have an affair tomorrow? And I would say early on it caused them to raise their eyebrows, but they know what that means today. What it means is that Mark and Steve are staying humble. They're not moving back into I got this by myself, me place. By saying I'm only sober today, they're staying in the we place. I'm going to continue to use my tools. I'm going to continue to live in healthy ways. I'm going to continue to connect to my partner. Why? Because all I can guarantee is where I am today.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that makes sense. I know that's a tough concept for partners to hear. Are we
Well,
never going to get past this?
well, and again, it's hard because again, for most of us, we've never experienced both types of marriage, right? And so it's hard to say, it's hard to see it through this lens of guys, any guy out there, and again, we see it all the time, is at risk of waking up one day and deciding to go access porn for the first time,
For the
or to have
first
an
time.
affair for the
For
first
the
time,
first time.
or to whatever, right? It
Yeah,
happens all the time,
it
right?
does.
These things just don't happen in an addiction-based window. And so real safety is not created through guarantees because those there are none we have to give you. And we're sorry about that, but we teach truth here, and that's the real. There are no guarantees. There
And
are none. Anyone who gives that to you is lying.
And we know after all the trauma your partners have been through, you really legitimately want a guarantee. And we feel that. It's wholly reasonable for you to want one. It's just that there isn't one.
No, but what can you do? And Mark actually asked. It was interesting because we were talking before the podcast. I wish we'd recorded it because he actually because we were talking about this and he was he was just kind of playing devil's advocate. He said, "Well, Steve, well then how do I feel safe? If I can't have guarantees, how do I feel safe?" And I can tell you right now, as an addict in recovery and my partner, and we've had many. If Brittany were here, I'd have her come on the podcast. She's not; she's working, but I'd have her just step on the mic, and she would be more than Mark knows her well. She'd be more than happy to tell anybody this. Brittany doesn't worry about me relapsing daily, and here's why. One, because she has done the hard work, and so have I, to the point where we have eliminated codependency in our relationship to the degree where we don't need each other in this marriage. We choose each other. We love each other. We run our lives in tandem with one another. We've made serious and solemn commitments to each other, and we support each other in all sorts of ways. But my life will never be Brittany's, and Brittany's will never be mine. We are two functioning independent people operating in a relationship in an interdependent manner. Brittany's done the hard work to not be impacted by my betrayal the way she used to be.
Yeah.
Her the self-confidence eggs, if you will, self-worth eggs, all of those things that used to be in the basket around that, she doesn't keep those in the sobriety basket anymore. Now, if I were to relapse, would that harm her? Of course it would.
Yes.
It would be devastating in a lot of ways. But she knows deep down 100% that she's enough without my sobriety. She is safe without my sobriety. My sobriety is my problem, and she would be okay if I completely went off the deep end. And that is combined, that's one half of it. Okay. And there's a lot to that, right? We're just touching on things today in this podcast. We will not flesh all of this out in 12 hours, much less one podcast. But the other half of it is that she knows that because I am consistently doing the work, I am consistently providing her with safety for transparent communication, being open about where I'm at. I maintain the ongoing boundaries around sobriety and slips that we set 10 years ago. They're still enforced today, and I still implement them when they're needed. And those rare times when they are. We still operate under all those same things. I try to be consistent every day, and that creates the safety side for her.
Yes.
That is how she is safe every day and can look you dead in the eye and tell you that. Just like I don't worry about relapsing today, even though I really am. I am one bad mouse click away from relapsing right now. I could get off this podcast recording this and go relapse in 5 minutes. I'm really good at it. That's not a bragging thing, but I'm really good at it. I could do it and it would be no problem.
You
But I don't
could.
have any fear I'm going to
No.
because I have a repeated demonstrated pattern of what I know works. Brittany operates in the same place. She knows I could relapse right now. So I could be in here acting out for all she knows, but because of the things that we just talked about, she doesn't worry about those things. They aren't a day-to-day concern, not even a month-to-month concern for her.
Right. So
Right?
if you kind of summarize what Steve's describing, Steve, you're investing in yourself each day and your power. Brittany is investing in herself and in her power,
Yes.
independent of each other.
And then we maintain a strong, transparent connection with each other.
And then you come together as two independently powerful people to collaborate and become interdependent.
And that's how
where
we
the
do it.
safety is. That's where the
Yes,
safety is.
absolutely. It's
Love
not through guarantees. It's through all of those things we just talked about. But again, that's like, if only there was a place where you could get more in-depth information on this huge, long process that we just described, which would be
exactly.
like
Yeah.
hours and hours of content, right?
Yeah.
Guys,
How to do your side, how he does his side, how to collaborate.
if there was a weekly program with a group for addicts and spouses and couples that you could attend, guys, dare to connect. Last week, I think I told everyone to get their ass in there. I'm going to lovingly say it again. Get your behind in there. I'm going to say it a little less fired up this week. Please, if you haven't tried Dare to Connect, if you like the podcast, there's really not a reason not to do it. The cost of less of 2 therapy sessions, you and your partner can have access to virtually unlimited hours of content that is ever growing, consistently fresh and new, and a place where you can interactively ask us questions in real time and get answers in real time.
Yeah.
Don't not waiting 2.5 months to get a half-hour response on a podcast.
Yeah, because
Okay?
we're way behind on your PBSE questions. We're trying.
We do. We just have a lot of submissions and we get through them the best we can. But this is a podcast that's not monetized. This is not a forum where we can do those things. We can do it there. Come join us. Pick up a free trial at daretoconnectnow.com. We'd love to have you come.
Yeah, love to see you over there. Well, hey, thanks for being with us again. Thanks for, man, all of you addicts in recovery wanting to get into recovery, all your partners in healing. Thank you for just listening and showing up and being willing to hear hard things, because we know that these are hard things to hear. And we just respect and appreciate all of you for even being willing to open yourselves to even look at this stuff.
Absolutely.
And just that, there's great hope in that. So we will look forward to our next podcast with all of you and hope to see some of you over in D2C.
Sounds great. Take care, everybody.
All right, see ya.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.